Daniel Reeves was the kind of man you'd pass in the grocery store and nod to politely, never guessing that he carried an entire lifetime of unfinished music inside him. At 61, he lived alone in a modest home near the bay, the kind with creaking floors that remembered every footstep. His days were practical: coffee, the morning paper, the same walk past the same oak tree. A retired logistics manager, he knew how to make sense of complicated systems but not of regret. His wife had left years ago, gently but decisively, and his grown son lived across the country. Daniel told himself that loneliness was just another kind of order, quiet, predictable, safe. Evelyn Hart, 62, lived 3 streets away without realizing it. A retired nurse and part-time hospice volunteer, she carried a calm that came from years of watching life fade and return in cycles. She had once been married to a quiet man who died before his laughter did. Her 2 daughters called often but visited rarely, their own lives too full of noise. Evelyn filled her time tending a small garden and attending community classes, painting, yoga, ballroom, collecting moments like pressed flowers. She still believed in grace, even when it arrived late. Their paths hadn't crossed in over 40 years. Once they had been inseparable, the boy who dreamed too much and the girl who didn't dare enough. In high school they'd been on the edge of something beautiful, until life asked them to wait. They never said goodbye. They simply drifted, like 2 notes from the same song carried by different winds. Neither of them knew that on one ordinary Tuesday, in a rain-scented community center, time would circle back to finish a story that began with a promise left waiting by the pier. I saw her again on a Tuesday afternoon that smelled like rain and old pine cleaner, the kind they use in school gymnasiums and church basements. The community center windows were fogged from the humidity, and a hand-lettered sign taped to the glass said, "Silver Steps, Ballroom for Beginners." I tried to imagine myself as a beginner at anything. At 61, my life had been mostly repetition. Accounts payable, mortgage paid off late, knees that protested stairs. And then there she was in the reflection, 30 yards behind me, a shape made familiar by the way she held her shoulders, as if carrying a melody no one else could hear. "Evelyn," I said, turning before my courage could evaporate. She blinked, and her face rearranged into recognition. "Daniel." The last time we had been that close, there had been lights strung like constellations across a high school gym, the air full of sugared punch and cheap perfume, and a song playing that none of us could ever again remember by name. We were 17 and terrified of wanting too much. We both stood in the doorway, 60 and change, trying to decide if we were still the same people who had turned away from each other at 17. The instructor inside clapped for attention. "All right, folks. Quick step warm-up. Are you here for this?" she asked, a half-smile tugging at her mouth. "I'm here for something," I said, trying to be clever and failing. She laughed softly, and then we walked in together. There's a photograph of me and Evelyn that I used to keep tucked into the back of an old paperback. My wife never saw it, not because I was hiding it exactly, but because there are some memories you cradle privately, the way you might keep a match cupped from the wind. The photo was taken by our friend Maria on the night of the senior dance. In it, Evelyn's hair is pinned up with 3 bobby pins she kept readjusting because she thought the style made her look older. I had borrowed a black tie from my father but tied it too short. It looks like a stubby question mark resting against my throat. We spent the first hour promising ourselves we would dance when the right song came on. Then the right song never came, or came when one of us was in the bathroom, or talking to someone else, or when the nervousness bloomed so wide across our ribs that the floor felt like a tightrope. Evelyn's boyfriend, if that's what he was, though the word did a lot of heavy lifting, hadn't shown. I wasn't officially hers, but I hovered. We grazed each other's elbows in hallways. We traded paperbacks and underlined the same sentences. She once kissed me in the empty library stacks as if I were a secret she wanted to practice saying out loud. Later, standing at the gym's edge that night, I said, "Let's dance." "Soon," she said. "I want to remember this." We did remember it, just not the way we planned. Half an hour before midnight, a fight broke out near the punch bowl. The principal shut everything down. We spilled out into the parking lot, neon insects under the streetlights, and someone's car alarm went off and kept going. I walked her to her father's station wagon. We promised to meet the next night at the old pier, the unofficial after-party. "I'll bring the music," I said. "No chaperones." We'll have our dance. But the next day my father's temper found the fragile glass of our kitchen clock, and my mother's eyes found mine and pleaded silently, and 1,000 small domestic storms conspired to pin me in place. I got to the pier late, too late. The air was cool and smelled like kelp. I waited under a sky with no moon, thinking she would be late the way I was late, as if lateness were a rhythm we had both decided to keep. She didn't come. Or maybe she did, and I was later than I remember. Memory is a soft carpenter. It sands the corners, it decides what to keep. We graduated, and the house I grew up in seemed suddenly too small, its doors the wrong height, its rooms too full of my father's size. The summer bloomed and passed. I got a job at a hardware store to save for college, and Evelyn worked at the ice cream stand near the beach, her hands always smelling faintly of strawberries. We waved. We said we'd catch up. Then she went south for school, and I went north, and our last dance kept itself waiting like an unopened letter. In the community center, the instructor's voice had the breezy confidence of someone who never forgot to show up for themselves. Quickstep is joyful, people. Think light. Think alert. It's tea time brisk, not coffee jittery. Evelyn lined up in a row across from me, and the kid in charge of the sound system pressed play. The music was tinny and cheerful, and suddenly all of us, widowers, newly retired realtors, a woman wearing orthopedic sneakers with rhinestones, were counting slow, quick. The floor smelled like varnish and rain. My knees negotiated with me. I tried not to stare at the way Evelyn's feet learned the pattern, how her body remembered what I had wanted to ask it to do 44 years ago. During a water break she came over. So, she said. Quickstep. Not exactly the pier at midnight. I kept the mixtape, I said, surprising myself with the admission. I almost said I kept you in some weatherproof pocket inside me, but it would have sounded like a lie told for effect. It's in a shoebox. The label peeled off years ago. Evelyn's eyes were sea glass gray. They always had been. I came to the pier, she said carefully. And you weren't there. I felt the floor tilt. I came too, I said. God, I was late. My father. I stopped, not wanting to excavate the soft rot of my family's history. I thought maybe you changed your mind. That maybe I'd imagined the way you looked at me. She considered this, and I watched her do it the way you watch the ocean decide whether to be a mirror or a fist. I didn't change my mind, she said. But I learned to. Then she smiled, as if saving us both from the undertow. Do you still listen to that song that's almost our song? I can't remember which one it was, I admitted. That makes two of us, she said, and her laugh was a little broken, like the back edge of a familiar wave. The thing about middle age is that small talk becomes precious. You learn to forgive it. You learn to welcome it like a lukewarm cup of tea on a cold day. Maybe not what you wanted, but kind, warming in its way. So Evelyn and I began with small talk. She had 2 grown daughters. I had a son who lived 3 time zones away but texted me photos of his dog in sweaters. She'd worked as a nurse and then as a hospice coordinator. I'd spent 30 years in logistics, a world of shipments and spreadsheets that always made sense until they didn't. Her husband had died 5 years earlier from a cancer that introduced itself fast and left quietly. My wife had left me first, emotionally, in the slow drip of mismatched priorities, and then physically, packing her kindness into a moving van. We were both, in our ways, connoisseurs of the things you cannot force to stay. We attended the Silver Steps class for 2 months, and in that time we learned to count together, to pivot, to forgive the other's missteps. Every week, the instructor would say something that sounded like it belonged on a greeting card and also on a tombstone. Hold each other like you mean it, but not like you own it. Travel lightly, but don't be afraid to arrive. We would meet after class at the diner with the sticky menus, where the waitress wrote down our orders as if they were wishes she planned to grant personally. One night, as the rain made Morse code at the window, Evelyn said, I always thought we missed something big. We did, I said. She stirred her tea. And maybe not. Maybe we put it in storage and it stayed dry. I have a garage full of dry things, I said. Sometimes I open a box and don't recognize my own handwriting. She looked at me. Do you ever wish you could go back? I wish I could go back and tell the boy I was to leave the house sooner that night, I said. And then I wish someone would tell that boy that it wouldn't have fixed the way he learned to hesitate. Hesitation was my second language, she said. My mother always said good girls don't go first. And your father? He was already gone, even when he was there. She smiled and it undid me a little. But once he taught me how to waltz in the kitchen. He smelled like sawdust and spearmint. He said, "You lead with your heart, baby, or not at all." I didn't realize he was giving me permission to choose. What did you choose? For a long time, I chose what hurt less in the moment. She lifted her tea. And then I learned that sometimes the pain takes the scenic route. We didn't touch across the diner table. We didn't need to. That spring, the community center planned a showcase evening. Nothing fancy, just an excuse to dress up and move in public. The instructor asked who wanted to perform. Half the class raised their hands because boldness grows differently in the second half of a life. I did not raise mine. Evelyn did not raise hers. "We could go and watch," she said to me later, tying her scarf the way I remembered her tidy movements from 17. "Applaud the brave." "I like the brave," I said. "I like them a lot better from the shadows." She laughed. "Same." We sat in the back row on the night of the showcase. Couples in their good shoes glided and hustled. The foxtrot looked like conversation done well, the tango like an argument worth having. The instructor, luminous in sequins, made eye contact with us from the stage and winked. Between numbers, a recorded song came on, slow, sentimental, the kind that makes people nostalgic for things they never lived through. The floor stayed empty for the transition, but the music kept going. Without thinking it through, I stood up and offered my hand. "Last call," I said, though I didn't know for what. Evelyn hesitated. Then she stood too, and we walked down to the lip of the dance floor, towing the border like teenagers contemplating a lake. We stepped in. It felt like stepping into a photograph that had been waiting for us to animate it. I put my hand at her shoulder blade, where bones and a lifetime met, and she settled her right hand into mine, not like a surrender, not like a test, more like agreement. The room dimmed for the next performance, but we were already moving, slow as if learning the gravity of the thing, quick when the music lilted. The instructor from the side whispered to the tech kid, and the tech kid, bless all the tech kids, did not cut the song. We crossed the floor and back. We turned once, twice, and the lights returned, but nobody stopped us. A few people clapped as if we'd finished an act. Maybe we had. When the song ended, we stayed still an extra second, the way you do at the end of a prayer when you're not ready to step back into language. We looked at each other. We were 61 and 62. The audience, kind and unassuming, returned to their lives. "That was," I said. "Yes," she said, and the word carried 30 words inside it. We sat back down. She didn't let go of my hand until the next couple took the floor. Something had shifted, something that didn't ask for a name. We did not become a romance in the conventional sense. Life's inventory for people our age includes mortgages that still echo, children who need you and then don't, griefs that wake up buoyant on random Tuesdays, and appointments with doctors who pronounce your body's new habits like weather forecasts. Also, the clocks run faster. The years have a way of inscribing their own terms. But we learned to claim small, faithful rituals. Tuesday class, diner tea. Occasional walks by the water where the pier had once waited for two teenagers who failed to arrive in tandem. We told each other stories our spouses had never asked for. I learned the names of the hospice patients she still visited voluntarily, said them aloud in my car on the way home, so the dead would have two mouths keeping them. She learned the sound of my silence when I was tempted to minimize what had hurt me. She didn't let me. And sometimes we danced when there wasn't music. In the baking aisle. On my driveway at dusk when the neighbor's porch light was the perfect romantic cliché. In her kitchen, where the floor sloped just enough to make us laugh as we corrected for it. We did not define ourselves to anyone outside the radius of our steps. The world saw two old friends. We saw an unbroken line drawn slowly, finally, across a map we'd abandoned long ago. That summer, my son called to say he was moving farther away. "It's a good job," he said. "They really value my work." "I hope they do," I said. We were not the kind of men who said I need you closer, and I wasn't sure if I was the kind of father who could become one. Evelyn squeezed my hand when I told her. "Sometimes loving someone is being the shore," she said. "You let them leave and keep washing up anything they forgot." "What if I forgot something?" I asked. "Then we'll put up lost and found signs," she said. "We'll check the tide." We went to the pier that evening. It wasn't ours, not anymore, and in truth it never had been. It belonged to time and salt and whatever teenagers were now being born with phones in their hands and a little less oxygen for magic. But we leaned against the weathered rail and watched boats return from the horizon as if we'd ordered them. I took something from my pocket. A cassette tape, the label pale and scaly from decades of optimism. "You really kept it," she said. "I did." I shrugged. "I don't even own a player anymore." She took it gently, as if it were a bird that might still fly. "Maybe it's better that we can't hear it," she said. "We can remember it any way we need." We stayed until the sky's last color stitched itself to the water. When we left, I gave her the tape. "Hold this for me," I said. She put it in her bag without ceremony. "Of course," she said. "For as long as you need." People like to say that the body keeps the score, but so does the calendar. In late autumn, Evelyn missed a Tuesday. Then another. I told myself it was nothing, that she was visiting one of her daughters, that the air pressure was bothering her ankles. When she returned, she smiled too brightly. "Just tired," she said. I had one of those weeks where all the patients want to tie up loose ends at once. I told her she was a good person. She told me not to promote her beyond her pay grade. That night after the diner, she asked if we could go for a drive. We ended up at the high school, a new building now with a glass foyer and an electronic sign flashing "Go Tigers." The gym was in the same place, though larger and colder. We walked around the track that circled the football field, our shoes ticking, breath visible. "I didn't come to the pier because I was afraid," she said abruptly, as if telling me something that could no longer fit inside her. I sat in my father's car and cried and wiped away the black mascara lines and told myself I wasn't a girl who changed plans for a boy, even if the boy was a song I couldn't stop humming. Then I told myself I'd meet you at graduation, or at the post office or in the dairy aisle, and it would be the right moment because life would tell me. But life is polite. It doesn't interrupt. It waits for you to speak first. I kept walking. I didn't come on time because I thought I had to fix my father's anger before I could earn something good, I said. As if love were a dessert you get only if you eat your discipline. He wasn't a monster. He was just a man who didn't know how to dance around his own past. But I made his storm my job. I learned to be late to my own life. We stopped by the goalpost. Under different rules, it would have been the perfect place to kiss her. Under our rules, it was the perfect place to be still. "You're not late now," she said. "And you're not afraid," I said. She smiled. "Oh, I'm always a little afraid." She looked up at the stars. "Maybe that's what keeps me honest." The winter that followed brought snow that fell like careful handwriting and then, suddenly, a week of rain that turned the banks into soup. It brought, for me, a diagnosis with a name I could pronounce and a treatment plan with a risk chart that looked like a skyline. I did the things you do. I marveled at how much time is taken by waiting rooms. I learned the ritual of bringing a sweater and a good book. I learned that the body is a territory with border disputes. Evelyn came with me when I asked, sat and told me stories about her patients that were not mine to keep. Jokes with the rough edges rounded off, parables smuggled in. When I slept, she held my hand lightly, as if steadying me in a gentle current. In April, when my numbers looked like numbers I could live with, I took her to the pier again. It was full of tourists in bright jackets, and a man was playing a battered guitar with all the hope in the world. He transitioned into a slow waltz that he probably thought was a pop song, and without prompting we stepped into each other. Her shoulder under my palm felt like a home I remembered and finally unlocked. The tourists did the thing tourists do. They took photos and decided we were sweet. We had left sweet behind. We were something else, salt and weather and the geometry of staying. "I love you," I said quietly into her hair. Not as a confession but as a weather report. "I love you," she said, not surprised, not wary, with the calm of announcing a truth that had already been paying rent. When the song ended, we didn't release each other right away. The guitarist smiled at us as if he had just tied a ribbon between two trees. At some point in our 60s, this is a statistic I invented but believe, there is a year in which your friends start losing more than their keys. That year arrived for us gently, then less gently. We attended more memorials than birthdays. We learned the names of casseroles that people bring to grieving households. We danced on Tuesdays anyway. The summer I turned 64. My son visited with his sweatered dog and a look in his eyes like new weather. We sat on my porch and tried to make the conversation round enough to hold what he was trying to say. "I'm getting married," he said finally, and then, bracing for my reaction, "to Tom." I laughed, a joyful bark that startled a bird on the fence. "Do you think I didn't know?" I said. "Do you think your father is a tree that old?" I stood to hug him and the dog got between us in a protective panic, and we all laughed and then we were all crying. I told Evelyn that night. "He was afraid I'd make it about me," I said. "Well," she said, handing me a dish towel in her kitchen, "everything is about us until it isn't. That's growing up at any age." She brushed my cheek with her thumb. "You done good, sure." We danced to the hum of the refrigerator, our steps finding the little tilt in her floor. "Your father would have liked him," she said. "My father would have worried about what the neighbors thought, and then he would have surprised himself with how much he liked him," I said. "Then he would have taught him to change the oil in a car and called it even." We both smiled at the ghosts who were decent enough not to haunt us loudly. It is fashionable sometimes to pretend that closure is a door you can choose and lock. We didn't lock anything. We left as many windows open as we could. We did learn to name the old thing properly, though. One night, after too much good wine at Maria's, yes, the same Maria who took the photo, now a grandmother and a brilliant storyteller, we came home and lay on the couch, my feet in Evelyn's lap, her fingers tracing the stubborn swell of my left ankle bone. "We could have been a tragedy," she said, as if reading the credits of a movie we had chosen not to see. You know, the kind of story people use to confirm that they shouldn't try. "We were a near miss," I said. "But then we turned it into a long, gentle crash." She laughed, delighted by the image. "A controlled landing," she said. "We even clapped when the plane touched down." "Do you regret not dancing that night?" I asked. "I regret not giving my 17-year-old self a louder voice," she said. "I don't regret saving the dance for when we could hear it. We were quiet for a stretch you could measure only in breaths." Then she said, "Promise me something." "Name it." "If one of us goes first, the other doesn't stop dancing." "I promise," I said, because some vows you can finally make safely when you're old enough not to hoard them. She tucked her feet under her, looking lighter for having asked. "Your turn. Name a promise you want." "Keep the tape," I said. "Even when it stops meaning anything." She nodded. "Done," she said, as if we were discussing the grocery list. In the end, the last dance we never had wasn't lost at all. Just took the long way around. It came to us in mornings when the light found us unguarded and in evenings when our small talk turned holy. It came in hospital chairs and grocery aisles and the stranger's wedding where we were asked, randomly, wonderfully, to teach the kids a basic foxtrot because someone had heard we could. It came in the sound of our knees complaining in harmony, and in the way her hand always found the back of my shoulder as if returning a borrowed book. We did have a final dance years later, though neither of us called it that at the time. It was at my son's wedding, in a garden behind a little chapel strung with yellow bulbs. The air was warm and smelled faintly of rosemary. The playlist, curated by my son with ruthless elegance, ran from Motown to modern pop, and at some point a waltz edited itself between two livelier tracks as if arriving late and unashamed. Evelyn and I were sitting at a table watching the young do what youth does when invited to believe in joy. I stood, offered my hand, and didn't say a word. She stood and took it without needing one. We moved onto the grass and began. We were not graceful. We were beautiful. There is a difference. Children slowed their sprinting to watch us. A cousin took a video without asking for permission, and later I watched it once and then put my phone down because some things only matter at their full temperature. I put my mouth to Evelyn's ear and said, "You know what this is?" "Yes," she said. "It's the last dance we never had." She smiled, and her eyes did that sea glass thing, and for a second she was 17 and 62 at the same time. "I think," she whispered, "it was always waiting for us to arrive." We didn't rush to leave the floor when the song ended. We let the applause, which may have been for us or may have been for the universe, which deserved it, wash over us. Then we walked back through the lights like people who knew how to keep a promise. Later, after cake and speeches and a moment with my son where we held each other longer than men usually allow, I found Evelyn near the edge of the garden, looking toward the dark where trees made a shadowed wall. She had the cassette tape in her hand. I don't know when she started carrying it to important nights. Maybe always. Want to try to remember? She asked. We could make it up, I said. We're good at that. She nodded. We are. We stood there, two silhouettes on the far side of most of our lives, and we hummed a song we couldn't name and danced to it softly, on the shared edge of our shadows. We weren't beginners anymore. We weren't experts either. We were just two people who had learned not to wait for the perfect music to start moving. When we finally stopped, I kissed her forehead, another kind of vow, and she slipped the tape back into her purse, into that weatherproof pocket she carried like a small, steady harbor. Let's go back, she said. We always do, I said. And we did. Again and again, for as long as we had steps left in us. Our last dance never missed, only delayed until it could be exactly ours.